All right, here we go. This is my final project, psilocybin assisted therapy and addiction, something I'm pretty passionate about and I've been really curious about for the last few years. And it's a very hot topic in Oregon right now because of Measure 109 being passed. So let's begin. Purpose of this experiment. This presentation is to talk about a history of psilocybin use in therapy in the United States. We're going to talk about what addiction is or psychological dependence and how we can use psilocybin to help people suffering from those disorders. I also am going to talk a bit about the backlash to psilocybin in therapy, psilocybin use in therapy, and then we'll look at what is the outlook for psilocybin use in therapy for the future. So, a brief history. Psilocybin has been used ceremonially and as a sacrament in many cultures throughout the world. The picture we have here, it's Mayan statues that they believe are depicting, or at least spirit, like some type of importance to psilocybin mushrooms. But it's a multicultural phenomenon. Many different cultures, Nordic cultures, Siberia, Africa, everywhere. A psilocybin mushroom grows. Cultures have been using them to help facilitate religion, spirituality, medicine. It's big. Also, history of therapy, psilocybin use in therapy in the West, in Western culture, in America. We could look at the published article in Life magazine called "Seeking the Magic Mushroom" by Wasson. This happened in 1955, where Wasson went to southern Mexico, northern Guatemala, and took mushrooms with a indigenous Mayan guide, and he came back and told his story to Life magazine, and the rest is history. Ever since then, and also the use of LSD in therapy, such as combating addiction, psilocybin has been really prominently used in psychological experiments, especially in the golden age, the 1950s and 1960s. There was a problem, though, as anyone can guess. The reason psilocybin and other drugs, psychedelic drugs, were banned was because it was not really regulated very well, and a lot of those drugs leaked into the population. They had a really big problem also with double-blind studies, such they couldn't figure out how to do it accordingly and use a scientific method. They used niacin and other substances, but it was just the way that the experiments turned out, just it didn't really work in a double-blind test. Anyway, all right. So there's a ban on psychedelics. We have Nixon and we have Timothy Leary, both big prominent figures in the 1960s when it comes to psychedelics. Nixon, obviously, being a really advocate for banning the use of psychedelics in America, going against the counterculture, really trying to persuade people that these are dangerous substances and a menace to society. Timothy Leary is obviously on the opposite spectrum. He wanted to essentially turn on America, turn everybody on to psychedelics, because he believed that they were a really powerful tool that should be given to the masses. Both of them were wrong in one way or another. Both of them had really debilitating ramifications on psilocybin and psychedelic use in therapy. Addiction or psychological dependence. Okay, so jumping to the other topic now, but essentially addiction is a compulsory action to either substance or habit or behavior that a person just can't overcome, and it has terrible ramifications on their life. There may be many different reasons why a person will develop a psychological dependence or a habitual dependence to a substance or activity. A lot of people note their family history, past trauma is a big one. Lots of people with PTSD could become addicted to substances, um, so it's really a no-brainer um, that those type of things have a debilitating impact on how people self-regulate. Dopamine is kind of that reward molecule. It's a molecule that gets used throughout the body, but in the case of addiction, it's this molecule that helps with learning. It helps with reward systems. So there's a big overarching belief that addiction kind of comes from this burst of dopamine, and then a person is kind of trying to chase that essentially. And as people overuse dopamine, the receptors actually regulate, and then it becomes harder and harder to get that burst of dopamine because they prune because the body just doesn't need to produce that much dopamine for a specific activity. It's already learned what it does. So anyway, that's like the really, really broad gist. But essentially, the best way I like to think of addiction is it's kind of like people create a rut, a psychological rut, and then they get stuck in that rut with compulsory behaviors or substances, and they have a hard time bouncing out of that rut, even if the addiction has bad ramifications on their life. Okay, so why might psilocybin be used in treating addiction? Well, all the studies that have taken place that are respectable in the academic community and kind of considered, good, uh, show that abstinence after using psilocybin is 6 months post-treatment is actually extremely high. It's very statistically significant. It's like 60 to 70%, which is huge. Like that is a giant win for treating addiction. We talk about all this anecdotal interviews of people experiencing awe, grandeur, loss of ego. But essentially, like psychedelics, kind of, and psilocybin help a person kind of rearrange their perspective by quieting the default network, the default mode network, and they allow the person to essentially that rut that they're in, bounce out of that rut enough to be able to rethink and re-perspect their personal narrative. That's that loss of ego right there. And then that gives the person the ability to think, or at least have the choice on, can I self-regulate? Can I get past this? Do I want to? And it essentially like nuances their perspective in a way that they hadn't been able to before. Even like mundane just thoughts and thought patterns might seem new, which is really awesome. This has to do with plasticity of the brain. We already kind of talked about that with dopamine, but essentially, like when you take psilocybin, like your neurons are able to kind of communicate or fire differently than you normally would, and they might be able to talk to each other differently. You see this with like synesthesia, but it's a little bit more than just that when it comes to addiction. Serotonin reuptake is also affected. Serotonin is kind of this overarching molecule like dopamine that regulates contentment. So if if psilocybin or other psychedelics help a person become more content, then that can help with content with their life and their perspective, then that can really help with treating addiction as well. Measure 109, obviously we talked about this a little bit in the beginning, but it's a hot topic because it was just green lighted, and it allows therapy and psychological treatment facilities to kind of like legally take root in Oregon, which is good because these substances can be extremely detrimental to a person and dangerous if taken in the wrong setting. But by opening up these facilities, there's a greater chance that we can do more good with these substances, which is awesome because we can regulate the set and setting. We have therapists working with patients. They can really like hone in on how much they should be taking, what substances, if this is a substance even safe to take, and is it even the substance that they think they're taking. big thing right now is safety. They do not want the same thing that happened in the 60s to happen again, where these drugs start leaking out into the public. Um, so that's the big backlash at the moment for Measure 109. And then, but overall, the future is looking really positive for psilocybin use in psychotherapeutic settings. So Oregon's Measure 109 is just the first step. Lots of other states will eventually kind of take the same steps, and depending on how it works in Oregon, public interest is at an all-time high, which is awesome. We can equate that to books like Michael Pollan's How to Change Your Mind and other social media influencers that are like basically telling people the truth about psychedelics without all the stigmatization, without all the funny nonsense of the war on drugs and the DEA. Um, uh, it doesn't scramble your mind. It's basically harmless as long as you take it in the correct manner. But anyway, the stigma is dropping also in academia, which is awesome as well. This conclusion. So psilocybin went through this golden age in the 50s and 60s. It's been used for centuries, thousands of years, millennia before that. But then because of a confluence of factors, it got scheduled class 1 by the DEA and Nixon, and it was no longer available to be researched. This created kind of a dark period, but now it looks like the future is looking good for psilocybin research again. Psilocybin is a powerful substance that can be used to help treat addiction by allowing people to change the perspective of their personal narrative. It also helps with serotonin balance, which is that molecule we talked about with contentment. And it has a lot of promises because it's overwhelmingly the research shows that a statistically significant population that takes this substance will benefit from the substance if they suffer from debilitating compulsory behavior such as addiction or psychological dependence. My references. Sorry about being long-winded. Thank you.